Hamilton's radio cut through the static in Baku. "I don't care about P8. 48 hours later, everything changed. A statement from Maranello arrived that sent tremors through the paddock. Ferrari weren't just reshuffling names on office doors. They were detonating the entire system, centralizing power and putting 3 hand-picked minds in charge of building the car that would define 2026. It was a move so un-Ferrari, so ruthless, that even Hamilton himself was stunned. Because this wasn't just another restructure, this was Ferrari saying, "We will live or die by one vision." That's why this moment matters more than any lap time, more than any qualifying session. Because Ferrari's gamble isn't about the SF25 anymore. It's about whether Hamilton's leap of faith was the boldest masterstroke of his career, or the final miscalculation of a fading legend. And to understand why this announcement could rewrite the championship story, we need to return to where the pressure finally broke. Baku, round 13. On Friday, Hamilton looked reborn. He topped the second practice session with a lap time of 1 minute, 41.6 seconds, almost 3/10 clear of Max Verstappen in identical conditions. For a moment, the paddock buzzed. Had Ferrari finally unlocked the setup window of the SF25? The optimism didn't last. By Sunday, track temperatures rose by just 4 degrees, and Ferrari's low ride height philosophy collapsed. Tyre degradation spiked nearly 20% higher than simulations predicted. Hamilton fell from 4th on the grid to 8th at the flag, lapping 1.1 seconds slower per lap on the hard compound than the Red Bull ahead. That's why his radio was so raw. It wasn't about one bad weekend, it was the culmination of months where practice pace teased hope, only for race reality to crush it. One set of data on Friday, a completely different car by Sunday. No stability, no consistency, no trust. For a driver who built his career on confidence under braking and precision at high speed, Ferrari had delivered him a weapon he couldn't rely on. And here's the twist. It was that collapse, that brutal midfield slog in Baku, that forced Ferrari's hand. Vasseur knew the numbers didn't lie. The SF25 wasn't broken in one place, it was broken everywhere. Suspension instability, aero inconsistency, energy deployment lag. You couldn't patch it. You had to rip it out and start again, which is exactly what Ferrari did with their announcement days later. But the true shock wasn't Vasseur's power grab, it was who he handed the keys to. Ferrari's official press release ran just 4 paragraphs, but the impact was seismic. For decades, Maranello had operated under what insiders called the horizontal web, a management style that spread authority across multiple departments. On paper, it looked collaborative, but in practice, it created paralysis. No one voice carried decisive weight, and when crises struck, Ferrari defaulted to hesitation. Fred Vasseur just tore that blueprint in half. From 2026, every major design and development decision will flow through his office. Beneath him, 3 lieutenants will form the most centralized technical structure Ferrari has attempted in the modern era. One responsible for suspension and mechanical grip, one for aerodynamics, one for cohesion. No endless committees, no competing philosophies. A vertical chain of command designed to eliminate Ferrari's greatest weakness, indecision. Why now? The answer lies in numbers Ferrari could no longer ignore. Across the 2025 season, their average qualifying deficit to Red Bull was 0.4 of a second per lap. More alarming was the spread. Some weekends, Ferrari looked within 0.2, others they dropped to nearly a full second. That inconsistency wasn't a driver issue. It was a structural flaw. The car behaved like 3 different machines bolted together. A suspension package tuned one way, an aero platform tuned another, and a power unit struggling to synchronize with either. The result was unpredictability so severe that even Hamilton admitted he was guessing with brake balance lap to lap. By centralizing authority, Ferrari are betting that clarity will breed consistency, but it comes with risk. In Formula One, concentrated power means concentrated blame. If Vasseur's trio miscalculate under the 2026 regulations, there will be no one else to shield them. It is the boldest form of accountability, and for Ferrari, the most uncharacteristic. What makes this move even more fascinating is the psychology behind it. Ferrari is a team defined by its mythology, haunted by ghosts of glory and failure alike. In the Schumacher era, clear leadership from Ross Brawn and Jean Todt delivered 5 consecutive titles. In the years since, the pendulum has swung toward politics and internal rivalries, where engineers fought turf wars instead of rivals. Vasseur's restructure is an attempt to bottle that Schumacher-era clarity while adapting it to a hybrid world. The paddock reaction was instant. One senior engineer at Mercedes described it as Ferrari ripping off the handbrake. Rival teams don't fear Ferrari when they argue. They fear Ferrari when they align. And this, at least on paper, is alignment in its purest form. But the most important detail wasn't Vasseur's authority or even the new chain of command. It was the identities of the men chosen to lead this revolution. Because each one represents not just a job title, but a direct answer to Ferrari's most painful failures of 2025. And none more so than Loic Serra, the man tasked with rebuilding Ferrari's suspension philosophy from the ground up. If there is one area where Ferrari's SF25 exposed itself most brutally, it was suspension. The team's decision to combine a conservative pull rod design at the front with an over-aggressive rear geometry was meant to deliver the best of both worlds. Stable turn-in with aggressive traction on exit. Instead, it delivered neither. The numbers are damning. On average, Ferrari lost 0.3 of a second in low-speed corner phases compared to McLaren, while suffering braking instability that cost Hamilton nearly 2 meters of stopping distance into Turn 1 at Baku. In Formula 1, 2 meters can mean the difference between attack and survival. Enter Loic Serra. Poached from Mercedes, where he built a reputation for mastery of vehicle dynamics and tyre behaviour, Serra's mandate is unambiguous. Rebuild Ferrari's suspension philosophy from the ground up. His focus isn't radical innovation, it's confidence. Confidence in how the car reacts under braking, confidence in how it loads tyres mid-corner, confidence that what Hamilton feels on Friday will still be there on Sunday. Without that, no amount of aero wizardry or power unit gains will matter. For Hamilton, this strikes at the core of his racing identity. His greatest weapon has always been precision under braking. At Mercedes, he trusted the car so completely that he could brake 6 to 8 meters later than rivals into heavy stops, knowing the balance would hold. At Ferrari this year, that confidence evaporated. On the mediums in Austria, telemetry showed Hamilton lifting off 12 meters earlier than Verstappen into Turn 3, but not by choice, but by necessity. The SF25's rear instability simply would not allow a late braking attack. Serra knows this isn't just about mechanical grip, it's about unlocking Hamilton. Give him a stable platform, and he can exploit every ounce of downforce Tondi's aero department generates. Leave the instability unresolved, and Ferrari's dream of a rebirth in 2026 dies before the first lights go out. The challenge is immense. Under the 2026 regulations, suspension must not only provide stability, but also integrate seamlessly with energy deployment systems. Ride height changes directly affect drag and energy recovery. A car that bounces or shifts unpredictably under braking doesn't just cost lap time, it disrupts the entire hybrid cycle. Serra's work will therefore determine not only how Ferrari's drivers feel behind the wheel, but how efficiently the car converts stored energy into raw speed. Ferrari's bet on Serra is bold, but the logic is undeniable. He arrives with a proven record of aligning suspension philosophy to driver strengths. Exactly what Hamilton has been begging for. The question is whether he can rebuild Ferrari's mechanical platform in time for the biggest regulation shift in a generation. And even if he succeeds, suspension stability alone won't save Ferrari. Because the next battlefield, Aerodynamics, is where the SF25 bled the most points. Which is why Diego Tondi's role could be even more decisive. If suspension defined Ferrari's frustration in slow corners, Aerodynamics defined their humiliation everywhere else. The SF25 was a machine that lied to its own engineers. In CFD simulations and wind tunnel runs, it looked competitive. But once rubber met tarmac, the illusion cracked. Sector analysis told the story with ruthless clarity. Ferrari were within 0.2 of Red Bull in low-drag configurations on circuits like Monza, yet hemorrhaged up to 0.7 in high downforce trim at Budapest. A car that was meant to be versatile instead lived within a razor-thin operating window. Step 1 degree outside it, and performance collapsed. This inconsistency fell directly on the shoulders of Diego Tondi, Ferrari's head of aerodynamics. Now, under the new structure, his role becomes existential. His task is not to find Ferrari a fast car. It is to give Ferrari a trustworthy car. One that doesn't swing from brilliance to disaster with the flick of a weather vane. Consider Silverstone as a case study. On Saturday, Hamilton qualified 4th, just 0.285 seconds off pole. Ferrari's high-speed balance through cops and maggots looked sharper than it had all year. But by race day, the track temp climbed to 27 degrees Celsius, and with it, Ferrari's balance evaporated. In the second stint, Hamilton's average lap time fell 0.6 seconds behind Lando Norris, despite identical tyre compounds. Why? Aero stability. Ferrari's downforce platform wasn't robust enough to maintain grip once the balance shifted. Norris could trust his McLaren through Stowe at 290 km/h. Hamilton had to feather. Under the 2026 rules, this problem only magnifies. The new regulations will put unprecedented emphasis on drag efficiency and energy deployment. Cars won't just need high downforce, they'll need to generate it without wasting hybrid energy through drag penalties. That means aero platforms must be not only effective, but universally stable across circuits and conditions. Tondi's challenge is therefore twofold. First, expand Ferrari's operating window so that their aero package performs consistently across a wider range of track temps, fuel loads, and tyre states. Second, integrate that package with the power unit team's energy deployment model so that Ferrari's straight-line speed doesn't collapse every time they dial in more downforce. In other words, Ferrari must build a car that can be both Monza fast and Monaco stable, a contradiction they've failed to solve for over a decade. For Hamilton, the implications are personal. This season, he has been at his most frustrated, not in traffic, but in high-speed corners where Ferrari's instability left him unable to commit. In Japan, telemetry showed him lifting nearly 5% earlier than Verstappen through 130R, a corner where Hamilton, in a Mercedes, once set the benchmark for bravery. To a driver who built his legend on total trust in the car at maximum speed, Ferrari's instability wasn't just slow, it was humiliating. If Tondi succeeds, Ferrari's aero revolution could restore Hamilton's edge. If he fails, the SF26 may prove no different from the SF25, flashes of brilliance buried beneath inconsistency, which is why Ferrari's third appointment, Frank Sanchez, might hold the real key. Because without integration, even perfect suspension and perfect aero will fail. Ferrari's problem has never been raw talent. Maranello has produced brilliant engineers, clever aerodynamicists, and power unit specialists of the highest caliber. The problem is they've rarely spoken the same language. For years, Ferrari has operated like three separate teams, bolted under one badge: chassis, aero, and power unit. Each worked to its own rhythm, each fought its own battles, and when those philosophies clashed, the car suffered. The SF25 made this dysfunction painfully visible. Its suspension demanded one ride height philosophy, its aero another, and its power unit mapping a third. On paper, each department delivered clever ideas. On track, the result was chaos. Brake instability bled into aero drag. Aero drag sabotaged power deployment. Power deployment demanded compromises that hurt suspension geometry. Instead of a unified machine, Ferrari's drivers were left with a car that felt like three concepts arguing beneath them. That is why the appointment of Frank Sanchez is so critical. Officially, his title is Integration Lead. In reality, he is the glue Ferrari have lacked since the Ross Brawn era. His task is to ensure that every design choice, from suspension pickup points to aero surfaces to hybrid deployment, serves a single, coherent philosophy. No more silos. No more compromises that cancel each other out. Consider how Mercedes dominated from 2014 onward. It wasn't because they had the most powerful engine or the most advanced aero in isolation. It was because the W05 and its successors were born as integrated projects. Power unit and chassis teams collaborated from day one, ensuring packaging, cooling, and energy deployment worked in harmony. Hamilton thrived because he never had to question whether his car was fighting itself. At Ferrari, by contrast, Hamilton has been caught on radio more than once, describing the SF25 as unpredictable from corner to corner. That wasn't driver exaggeration. It was the sound of a car without cohesion. Sanchez's job is to change that. His approach is data-driven, but brutally pragmatic. Integration isn't glamorous. It doesn't produce headline lap time gains overnight. But it prevents Ferrari's greatest weakness, self-inflicted wounds. If Sanchez succeeds, Ferrari could gain consistency worth 2 to 3 tenths per lap, simply by eliminating internal contradictions. In a sport where championships are often decided by fewer than 20 points, that margin is enormous. But there is risk. Centralizing integration around one figure places immense pressure on Sanchez. If the car still feels fragmented in 2026, the blame won't fall on aero or suspension. It will fall on the man tasked with unity. That makes Sanchez Ferrari's quietest yet most pivotal appointment. And all of it will operate under the watchful eye of Fred Vasseur. By inserting himself directly into the decision chain, Vasseur has guaranteed that Ferrari will no longer hide behind process or committees. Every mistake, every triumph, every regulation interpretation will trace back to his desk. The gamble is clear. Ferrari are betting everything on a structure that prioritizes clarity over caution. But the 2026 regulations are coming fast, and they represent both Ferrari's greatest opportunity and their greatest threat. Every Formula One revolution lives or dies by its timing. Ferrari's decision to centralize their technical command would mean little if the regulations were static. But they are not. In 2026, Formula One will undergo its most dramatic reset since the hybrid era began in 2014. And that is why this restructure feels like an earthquake rather than a reshuffle. The FIA's new rules will redefine the balance between combustion and hybrid power. Engines will generate less from fuel and more from electric deployment, with the MGUK output nearly tripling to 350 kilowatts. That means teams who fail to integrate power deployment with aero drag will pay dearly in straight-line speed. Simulations suggest efficiency margins could swing as much as 0.5 of a second per lap between well-integrated concepts and poorly integrated ones. For Ferrari, haunted by a decade of disjointed designs, this is both the ultimate challenge and the ultimate opportunity. Drag reduction will also become central. The new aero rules place greater emphasis on efficiency, not just downforce. A car that produces high peak downforce but carries excess drag will cripple its hybrid efficiency and lose deployment power down the straights. Ferrari's history here is not encouraging. The SF25 in high downforce trim carried nearly 14 counts more drag than the McLaren, a deficit that cost Hamilton over 0.4 seconds on Suzuka's back straight alone. If Ferrari cannot shed that penalty, the power unit team's progress will be wasted before it reaches the wheels. Yet the reset also wipes the slate clean. Red Bull face the uncertainty of transitioning to their Ford power unit partnership, a project unproven in the hybrid era. Mercedes are betting on youth, with Andrea Kimi-Antonelli carrying the burden of expectation alongside George Russell. McLaren's aero brilliance is undeniable, but they will be starting with the same blank sheet as everyone else. Ferrari, for once, are not chasing shadows. They are building on equal ground. For Hamilton, this timing is everything. He will be 41 when the 2026 season begins, an age where most drivers are either retired or fading. He cannot afford another 3-year project. He needs a car that works from day one. The restructure, then, is Ferrari's declaration that they understand the stakes. This isn't about evolution. It's about revolution under a new rulebook. The mathematics underline the pressure. Ferrari's last championship drought has already stretched to 17 years. If they fail again in 2026, they risk entering their third decade without a title. For Hamilton, failure would mean his Ferrari gamble joins the ranks of champions who tried and failed in red: Alonso, Vettel, even Prost. But success would place him in the rarest company of all, a driver who not only won in silver, but resurrected Ferrari's myth. The 2026 reset is Ferrari's escape hatch and their trapdoor. Which one it becomes will depend not only on their engineers, but on how their rivals respond to Maranello's bold gamble. And make no mistake, Red Bull, Mercedes and McLaren are already sharpening their weapons. Ferrari's gamble doesn't happen in isolation. Every rival sees the same 2026 reset coming, and each one is preparing its own answer. Red Bull, dominant for nearly a decade, now face the uncertainty of their Ford partnership. On paper, the integration promises world-class resources, but behind closed doors, whispers in the paddock suggest early simulations have revealed volatility in energy recovery systems. If true, Red Bull may enter 2026 with a power unit that is fast but fragile. Mercedes are taking a different risk. By backing Andrea Kimi-Antonelli alongside George Russell, they are trading experience for youth. The Brackley model is continuity in engineering and boldness in talent. The risk is obvious. A young driver under enormous pressure, a team without the stabilizing weight of Hamilton's legacy, and the challenge of developing a car that balances consistency with aggression. Then there is McLaren, perhaps Ferrari's most immediate rival. their aerodynamic efficiency has been the benchmark of 2025, consistently delivering Sector 2 dominance at tracks like Barcelona. But McLaren's challenge is resources. They don't have Ferrari's budget depth, nor the manufacturing scale of Mercedes or Red Bull. If the 2026 reset tilts toward integration of power and aero, McLaren's brilliance could be constrained by the limits of their toolbox. All of this converges on Hamilton. At 41, he has no time for a slow burn. He joined Ferrari not to experiment, but to etch his name into their myth. If the restructure works, he will become the man who resurrected Maranello, placing his name alongside Schumacher as the architect of a Ferrari rebirth. If it fails, he will join Alonso and Vettel as legends who arrived with hope and left with heartbreak. That is the razor's edge. So here is the question. Only time will answer. Is Ferrari's centralization the masterstroke that will finally free them from 2 decades of failure, or just another bold promise swallowed by Maranello's endless cycle of frustration? Because the countdown to 2026 has already begun, and every rival is building their answer.